Good evening, friends. Welcome back to Nocturne Library. Or welcome in, if you're new here. I'm Ava Calloway, and I'm really glad you're spending a little piece of your night with me. Before we begin, just let yourself settle. Get the lights nice and low. Tuck yourself into whatever corner feels safest and softest. Maybe put your headphones on if you have them nearby, and give yourself permission to be completely done with the day. There's nowhere to be now. Nothing to solve. You can just listen. Tonight's story was written by the wonderful Nora Fielding, and it's the kind of story that feels less like an adventure and more like being gently carried somewhere quiet. You're heading to a secluded cabin deep in a Nordic forest, where the snow keeps falling in that hushed, steady way it does, and the whole world seems to soften around it. There's a wood-fired sauna waiting for you, a dark, still lake, cold air on warm skin, and that deep winter silence that somehow makes everything inside you begin to loosen. This one moves in a very calm, unhurried rhythm through 12 chapters, drifting between heat and cold, inside and outside, firelight and snowfall. It's meant to help all that tension slowly unwind, little by little, until you're not really trying to sleep anymore. You're just naturally arriving there. And if you do enjoy stories like this, a quiet like or subscribe always helps the channel keep making more of them. All right, love, let's take one slow breath in and let it go. Now, get cozy, and I'll bring you to Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Door into Warmth. Your palm is already on the latch when the heat reaches it through the seam of the door. A thin band of warmth against cold skin. Cedar and iron meet you first. Then the darker, sweeter trace of smoke from alder kindling under birch. You ease the door inward, and the room opens in amber boards and rising heat. The bench, the stove, the copper bucket catching a low gleam. The floorboards give a little under your weight. Old pine warmed through from years of this same work. Not hot at the entrance, not yet, but warmer with each step inward. The door closes behind you with a wooden click and a softer settling sound from the frame. At once, the outer cold leaves your back. The room narrows to timber, iron, water, and air. Inside, the cedar has taken on a deeper tone in the low light. Brown red and honey, where hands and shoulders have polished it over time. You notice the grain nearest the door first, then warmth reaching the fronts of your shins, then the bench along the wall, and the squat shape of the stove drawing the eye. The Ito sits with a steadiness that changes the room around it. Iron sides dark, stones stacked above the firebox, heat gathered and kept. You can hear the faintest live sound from it if you stop moving. A low internal murmur from the wood bed, then a metallic tick as the iron shifts by a hair's breadth. Nothing sudden, just the ordinary sounds of metal warming. near the door, fixed to the wall where the heat reaches but does not scorch. The juniper hook curves out from the timber. You lift your wool robe from your arm and hang it there. The fabric falls with a thick, familiar weight, one fold over another. By the time you need it again, it will have taken on some of the room's warmth, not dry and brittle, only warmed through enough that your shoulders will know the difference. You smooth the sleeve once without thinking, the way you do with any garment you mean to return to, and leave it there, gathering heat by degrees. The air strokes your face differently here than it does outdoors. Outside, cold draws every edge sharply. Inside, heat rounds them. Your cheeks begin to loosen first, then the hinge of the jaw. You had not quite noticed the set of it until now. Not fully. Only enough to feel the small release when it eases. Beside the bench stands the matte copper bucket, filled already, its surface dimmed by use, and touched here and there with brighter marks where hands have lifted it over years. The water inside is still cold enough to keep its brightness. You can feel that just by looking at it, by the way the room's warmth has not yet changed its character. A ladle rests across the rim. Birch, darkened smooth at the handle, where palms have turned it satin. Eero's old one. Birch stays comfortable in the hand, cold or hot. You move farther in, and the temperature changes in layers. At shin height, one warmth. At the ribs, another. At the face, another again. Heat rises and gathers higher up. Even before you climb, your shoulders feel the difference when you lift your chin. The cedar there carries a richer glow, and the board edges have rounded under years of use. You stand near the stove and let your breathing catch up with the room. In through the nose, where the cedar comes resinous and warm. Out through parted lips, where the air leaves your mouth a little cooler than it entered. Already the cold in your fingers begins to thin. There is a small window set high, its glass dark with the night beyond. No view from where you stand. Only a suggestion of white moving past now and then when snow crosses the pane. You begin to undress with the room already working on you. Wool first, then the heavier outer layers that have kept the path and the night from reaching too far in. Each layer leaves more skin open to the warmth. The backs of the knees notice the warmth. The forearms, the upper chest, where cooler fabric had rested. There is a simple relief in no longer carrying the weather on your shoulders. The boards beneath your feet are dry and faintly textured, never slick. You place each folded layer where it belongs, not from tidiness for its own sake, but because order makes the next movement easier. The room is arranged so you don't have to think about the next step. A small sound comes from the stove again. A brighter tick this time. Then stillness. You glance at the stones, dark and dense above the firebox, their surfaces uneven. Some edges almost matte, some carrying a low sheen where steam has passed over them again and again. They are not yet touched with water tonight. untouched stones hold the room in dry heat. The first steam does not need to be hurried. Heat can gather and wait. You sit on the lower bench to begin. The cedar receives your weight with a dry warmth that is different from cloth or upholstered furniture, firmer and more direct. Through the backs of your thighs and the base of your spine, you feel the stored heat in the wood itself. The bench is not soft. Your feet rest flat on the boards. Your hands, for a moment, lie palm down beside you. And even there, the wood gives back warmth. The room's light comes from a shielded lamp low on the wall, and from the stove door's faint seam of orange. Nothing bright enough to sharpen the eyes. The cedar absorbs more than it reflects. Corners recede, not into mystery, only into less importance. You find yourself looking at what matters nearest. The curve of the bucket handle, the grain line in the bench, the iron lip of the stove, the robe on the juniper hook waiting where you left it. When you inhale more deeply, the scent of turvolepis smoke comes through under the cedar, darker and slightly sweet. Then the cleaner note of split birch above it. Old heating methods leave a particular memory in wood. The wood still carries it. This room has known alder under birch for decades, and the air still carries the faintest proof. Your shoulders drop another fraction. The change is gradual. A little less lift near the ears. A little less pull across the shoulder blades. Your tongue rests lower in your mouth. The forehead smooths because there is no reason for it not to. You lean forward and touch the ladle handle, only to feel its temperature. Cooler than the room, warmer than the water. The birch is smooth under your fingers, dark at the grip, paler where the bowl begins. You set it back across the bucket. Not yet. This is only the crossing over. This letting the room become more real than whatever came before it. From here, you can see the path of later movements without needing to take them. The upper bench where heat gathers more evenly. The door that will open to the pause space, and then beyond that to the deck. The place near the threshold where your robe hangs on the hook, taking in warmth by degrees. The latch you will lift again with a hand made steadier by heat. The boards outside that will cool the soles of your feet in one bright instant. And after that, the turn back in. The heat reaches your knees now with more authority. Your skin adjusts, then opens to it. After a few minutes, the warmth feels natural again. One snowflake, melted from a cuff or hem, has dropped onto the floor near the door and left a dark coin on the pine. As you watch, it thins at the edges and disappears into the board. Damp cuffs, cold hands, breath shortened by weather. Even the last of the outside clinging to your skin begins to give way. You rise at last and place one foot on the lower rung leading to the quiet shelf. The cedar there is warmer under the sole. You bring yourself up slowly, one hand on the wall for balance, not because the climb is difficult, but because moving slowly suits the room better. On the upper bench, the heat gathers exactly where you were told it would. Around the shoulders, along the upper arms, across the chest. You sit with your back against the cedar and let the wood support its share. From here, the stove is nearly level with your gaze. The stones above it hold their silence. The bucket below catches a dull gleam. The robe hangs by the door, heavier now with warmth than with cold. The room feels reduced to a few familiar things, and that is enough, though not quite all. You rest your hands on your thighs. Your breath lengthens on its own. The iron gives one more small settling tick, then another after a pause so slight you almost miss it. Heat moves across your skin in a broad, even way. Cedar rises at your back with a honey scent. Beneath it, the bench is firm and warm, and you let more of your weight go into it. Below, the ladle stays where you left it, the water unlifted, the first steam still waiting in the stones. Chapter 2. The first steam. You stay where you are for a while, letting the bench take more of your weight. The first warmth has already reached your skin, but now you begin to notice how it is arranged. The cedar at your back is not simply warm. It has its own texture of heat, dry and even, gathered into the grain. Beneath your palms, where they rest on your thighs, the air feels lighter than the bench itself, almost thin by comparison, and your fingers sense the difference between wood warmth and room warmth without needing to move. Your shoulders are still carrying a little of the outside in them. Your jaw is still a place where the week has left its shape. But both have started to loosen. Not all at once, only by a degree or two. Heat comes off the stove in steady waves. It is not a sound exactly, more the presence of heat coming off metal and stone. A dry, mineral exhale that reaches you in intervals. The sides of the Ito have gone dark with use and age, and above the firebox, the stones sit heaped in their familiar stack, dense and matte, each one storing more than it shows. In this light, they are nearly black, though you know their true color by daylight, the deep, weighty gray of olivine diabase, chosen because they take in heat slowly and give it back with patience. They do not flash or spit when treated properly. They give off a full, deep steam, the kind that fills a room without turning harsh. For the moment, though, no water touches them. That pause matters. You can feel it in the room, in the way the heat stays steady and dry, in the way your breath moves through your nose with no clouding damp yet. The first steam is never rushed. You sit with the stove first. You let the skin begin to open. You let the bench and the air and the iron introduce themselves again, although by now they hardly need introduction. Your eyes move over the details without needing to fix on any one thing for long. The copper bucket beside the bench catches a low amber gleam, the cold water inside still mineral bright. Near the rim, the pail is dimmed with condensation. One of the drops has run down the side in a narrow line, crossing the matte copper before disappearing. Another still clings lower down, smaller now, nearly dried by the room. Already your attention stays close. A bench, a stove, a bucket of water, the space your breath occupies, the place where your shoulder blades meet the cedar. You find that your attention no longer reaches outward in every direction. It lands nearby and stays there. The felt hat waits by the door where the warmth can reach it. Here on the bench, the room's heat begins to work more gently at the places you had not noticed were tense. Your scalp, your ears, your temples, the hinge of your jaw. Heat reaches these places, then eases them. You do not have to do much with that relief. It can happen without being helped. You shift 1 foot slightly on the bench rung below, and the old wood answers with a muted note. The movement changes the way the heat reaches your legs. Your shins had been cooler than your knees. Now they begin to catch up. Your hands uncurl from your thighs and rest beside you instead, palms down on the cedar, and the wood meets them with a stored warmth that feels steadier than the air. Again, the stove gives a small metallic tick. The sound lands in the room and fades. You hear it the way you hear a board settle in a familiar house. Not as interruption, only as part of the structure continuing to be itself. The iron adjusts. The stones continue to gather and hold. Somewhere behind the stove door, birch laid over alder kindling has burned down to a more settled bed, and a faint trace of turbilepa smoke remains woven into the cedar and heat. Not strong, not fresh from the firebox now, just the dry memory of it in the room. You let your gaze come to the ladle. Arrow's birch ladle leans against the bucket where you left it, handle darkened smooth by years of damp hands and changing heat. Birch is right for this work. It does not turn unfriendly in the grip when the room grows hotter, and it keeps a certain gentleness at the handle even after long use. The handle has been worn to the shape of use, rather than ornament. Your own hand finds its place on it easily, but not yet. You wait a little longer before pouring. You feel the dryness of the room more distinctly while you wait. It settles over your chest and throat in a way that is not uncomfortable, only preparatory. Your breathing has lengthened since you came in. The inhale reaches lower now. The exhale leaves with less effort. At first, when you sat down, your ribs moved high and quick. Now the movement has dropped. Your chest widens more at the sides. Your belly softens enough to receive the breath instead of managing it. The heat has climbed to your shoulders. That is where you notice the first true change. The muscles there, which came in lifted and slightly braced, begin to descend from their own habit. Not fully. They still hold a little shape, but the line from neck to shoulder rounds out, less defended than before. Your upper arms grow heavier, the backs of your knees warm. The skin over your collarbones feels more open. The heat works into the tightness, one place at a time. You lean forward at last. The movement is unhurried. Your feet find the floorboards. They are warm near the bench, warmer still closer to the stove, and you feel the change through the soles at once. You bend for the ladle, fingers closing around the birch handle, thumb settling into the place worn for it. The cold of the water registers at once through the ladle. When you dip the ladle in, the copper gives a low contact note. Water gathers into the bowl with a clear, compact weight. You sit back again with the ladle in hand. For a breath or two, you simply hold it. The contrast is immediate and precise. The warmth on your face, the coolness near your knuckles, the smooth, dry birch under your palm. The stones are close enough now that you can feel their stored heat on the back of your hand. You angle the ladle slightly, watching the water move inside it, dark in this light, edged by a faint reflection from the stove. Then you pour. The first contact is a low hiss, not sharp, but full, as the water meets the upper stones and threads downward through the stack. For a moment, the sound deepens, broadens, and then the steam rises in one rounded wave. You do not see all of it at once. You feel it first at your hand and wrist, where you have just drawn the ladle back, then across your face, then over your shoulders as the lowly opens and spreads through the room. The iron answers with two tiny, settling ticks. Steam reaches differently than dry heat. It rolls over your skin and then into it, and the room changes shape around you in an instant. So complete, and yet so familiar, that your own breath adjusts before thought catches up. You set the ladle back against the bucket. The birch handle gives a small tap against copper. Then you rest your hands again, one on each thigh, and receive the steam where it arrives, across your forehead first, then at the bridge of your nose, your cheeks, your lips. Your face had not seemed tight until now, but the steam shows you the places that were still held. The muscles around your mouth ease. The skin at your temples grows damp. Your jaw, which had been easing by degrees, lets go another measure. You notice your teeth are no longer touching. The lowly gathers at shoulder height with particular fullness, and this is where the quiet shelf earns its name. Up here, the heat is even, not fierce, and the steam arrives broad and complete. It wraps over the tops of your shoulders and down between them, then settles along your upper chest. Your collarbones become warm under the skin. The center of your chest lifts on the inhale and softens more fully on the exhale. A thread of moisture forms at the base of your throat and moves no farther, drying almost as soon as it appears. You breathe in through your nose. The air is hotter now, but gentler too. The cedar scent has changed under steam, becoming richer, more honeyed, less dry at the edges. The iron note from the stove remains beneath it, And under that, the mineral trace of water, newly changed. You can smell the stones in a way that is not exactly smell, more the clean density of heat released from rock. Your hands begin to warm from the outside in. Earlier, when you came through the door, they still carried some remnant of cold at the fingertips and across the backs where the air had found them. Now the fingers loosen one by one. The webbing between thumb and forefinger softens. Your palms, resting on your thighs, grow pleasantly damp where skin meets skin. Heat reaches your wrists and moves up your forearms in a gradual tide. The steam has risen and spread, and now begins to thin. But it leaves something behind in every place it touched. Your shoulders are lower. Your chest moves more freely. The back of your neck has stopped trying to hold your head up all by itself. Even your eyes feel different in their sockets, less fixed, as if the muscles around them have remembered they can rest. You find yourself watching the stones again. Tiny, dark patches mark where the water struck and vanished. The upper layer has already returned to its dry look, but deeper in the stack, moisture is still turning to steam. This, too, has its rhythm. Water cast, steam lifted, heat altered, then restored. You do not need to think far ahead. Another ladle will come later, then another round of sitting, then the bench by the firelit room beyond. Then, in time, the door opening to the deck, and the first cold breaths over the lake. But that is not yet. For now, this first unwinding is enough. You're still alert, but less keyed up, less sharp at the edges, less interested in scanning beyond the room. It has narrowed to what is useful. The heat on your skin, the steadiness of the bench, the stove's iron settling, the last of the steam moving past your face. You feel present in a simpler way, as if each sensation has been given a little more space, and each thought a little less. Another metallic tick comes from the stove, then a pause. You lower your chin by a fraction and let the warmth gather at the back of your neck. Your shoulders round forward just enough to release more fully between the blades. The cedar supports you. The bench remains firm beneath your thighs. Your feet rest flat on the boards, where warmth rises through the soles and into your ankles. The bucket sits beside you with its dim copper glow. The ladle leans where you set it. The stones continue their dense inward work above the firebox. Steam has left a trace of dampness along your upper lip and across your temples, and even that begins to dry in the heat. You breathe in. You breathe out. The exhale is longer now than it was when you first sat down. And without deciding to, you let a little more of yourself settle into the quiet shelf, ready for the next ladle when the room asks for it. Chapter 3. Bench by the Firelight. When the next ladle has done its work, and the rounded breath of steam has passed over your shoulders, you stay only until the heat begins to feel like enough. The heat has sunk in, and now your skin wants the first touch of less. Cedar burns hot against your back. Your jaw has unclenched enough that you can feel the weight of it. Simple and ordinary, instead of the way it had been set earlier, almost without your knowing. Sweat gathers at your throat and along your ribs, and seems all at once ready to cool. Then, before the pull of the stones asks for more water, you rise. The movement is slow, not because you are tired, but because the room has taught your limbs a different pace. The soles of your feet meet the lower bench, then the old pine floorboards below, and the wood gives back a stored warmth that feels flatter and steadier than the heat gathered higher up. You place one hand near the doorframe, not for balance exactly, more from habit, and the latch is warm from the room. When you open the sauna door, the air beyond is cooler at once, but not cold. It meets your face first, then the damp skin of your chest and throat, and the change sends a small thrill across your skin. Behind you, the stove answers with one small metallic tick as its sides settle. Ahead, the adjoining room opens in amber and firelight, a middle place between the close heat of the bench and the bright bite of the deck outside. You step through and let the door ease shut behind you. The difference is immediate, though nothing in it is abrupt. In the sauna, warmth presses from every side. Here, it comes in layers. Heat from the stove room reaches your shins and hands first. The air is cooler over your shoulders. Dampness begins to lift from your skin. You feel your skin cool and dry. The bench beside the stove room warmth is where you go without deciding much about it. Its boards are older than the cedar inside. Pine, worn satin smooth in the places where people have sat and shifted and rested for years. When you lower yourself onto it, the seat is warm in patches, cooler near the edge, and the grain presses faintly against your skin. Your pulse feels steadier here. For a few breaths, you do nothing but sit. The room carries the mixed scents that belong only to this part of the ritual. Cedar still clings to your skin from the sauna, honeyed and dry. But here it is joined by the darker trace of smoke from the firebox, tervalepa from the alder kindling laid under the birch, a scent with a faint tar-sweet edge that sits low in the air and in the wood of the walls. It is not the sharp smoke of an open fire. It is older and closer to the timber, settled into the room over many winters, stirred each time the stove is fed and the draft shifts for a moment. Your shoulders drop another fraction. It is easier to notice small returns here. The first is in your hands. In the sauna, heat had filled them so completely that they almost disappeared into it. Now, sensation narrows and clarifies. The pads of your fingers cool first, then warm again from the firelit air. A bead of moisture slips from your wrist to your palm, and you rub your thumb across it without thinking. Your breathing is fuller in the lower ribs. The exhale reaches farther down than it did before, leaving the chest less lifted at the end of it. The wool robe hangs near the door on the juniper hook, where you left it earlier, taking in warmth without losing its heft. You glance toward it and register its shape, the way you might register the position of a familiar cup on a shelf. The felt hat is there too, brim slightly tilted. Both pieces dry enough at the edges now to promise comfort later. Nothing needs to be adjusted yet. It is enough to know they are there, warming in place. The old pine floorboards answer the house in their own way. Not with creaks exactly, but with tiny, settled sounds as the heat shifts through them. When you set your feet more firmly beneath you, they give a little under your weight, then rest. Their surface is smoother in the paths most often taken, and faintly ridged nearer the wall, where winter grit has been swept away 1,000 times. You notice one cooler seam between boards under the ball of your foot, and then lose track of it as warmth returns there too. Across from you, behind the stove door, the fire has dropped to a bed of embers, with one birch log still working its way inward. The bark has curled back in pale strips. Along the split face, orange light shows through a darkening crust, brighter when a small channel opens, and then dimmer again. The heat from it is not the full-bodied heat of the sauna. It brushes one side of you at a time. Shin, forearm, cheek. You turn your palms toward it and feel the skin tighten, then release. The signs of change are plain now. Your tongue resting lower in your mouth, your brow uncreased, your thighs heavy on the bench instead of braced. Your pulse, which arrived with you high and quick from the steam, begins to settle into something slower and more even. Moisture leaves your forearms first. Your chest no longer lifts to meet each breath. After a while, you lean forward and rest your forearms on your knees. The posture changes the breath again. Your back rounds. The skin across your shoulders cools a little more. A drop from your hairline reaches your temple and cools there at your neck. You look toward the stove room and the stacked wood beside it. Not because you are thinking ahead, only because the eye likes a steady thing to rest on. Split birch is piled within reach, pale faces turned outward, bark silvered and papery in places. Each piece carrying that clean, faintly sweet smell that comes even before flame touches it. One more log will do. You rise from the bench and cross the floor in 2 unhurried steps. The boards are warmer nearer the stove room. You bend and choose a piece of birch from the top of the stack. Not large, just enough to feed the embers without changing the room too quickly. The log is cool on the underside, where it has been lying against the others, and dry along the split face. A dusting of bark flakes catches at your palm. When you open the small fire door, the room answers with a brief, bright intimacy. Heat lifts toward your hand and face, direct and living, and the embers inside show themselves fully, red at the base, furred with gray ash at the edges, breathing brighter with the opened draft. For a moment, the alder beneath comes forward again in scent, that darker tervalepa note sharpened and sweetened by air. You set the birch in place with care, laying it where it can catch from the side, rather than smother what is already there, enough to keep the room warm. Then the door closes, iron to iron, a contained sound, familiar and familiar in the nicest way. You stand there for a moment after, hand still near the latch. Already the fire has begun its work, not visibly at first, but you can hear it in the smallest way, a dry inner crackle from the bark, a faint settling as the new piece takes heat. The room won't warm at once, but the fire is set. That is enough. Back on the bench, the pause resumes, but not quite as before. Your skin has dried in some places now, and remains damp in others. The fronts of your shins are dry. The hollow behind one knee is not. Your chest cools more quickly than your back, where the heat had gathered against the bench. You bring one hand to the opposite shoulder and feel the difference under your palm. The skin there still flushed and warm, the upper arm already closer to the room. These are the kinds of details the mind can rest on without effort. One thing, then another. Nothing to solve. The robe on the hook has taken on more heat from the room. You can almost feel its weight before touching it. That dense wool warmth that will come later over your shoulders in a single settled drape. The juniper hook itself is half hidden by the robe now, but you know the curve of it, smoothed by years of use, fixed at just the right height beside the door, where damp cloth can warm and air through. Another breath leaves you more completely than the last. You notice, with mild surprise, how little you need from the next few minutes. Not the full heat again yet. Not the cold deck. Not more steam. Just this interval where the warmth has edges and the air touches you differently in different places. Your body stops treating the change as a shock. Nothing is required but the crossing itself. The fire brightens behind the stove door as the birch catches more fully. Its light reaches under the bench in a low, amber band. On the floorboards, that light shows the softened shine of old use. The places where bare feet have polished the pine over years of winter nights. You slide one foot forward and then back, feeling the grain and the slight drag of drying skin against wood. The sensation is plain and grounding, enough to keep thought from straying far. Somewhere behind the sauna wall, the stones are still giving back the first round of heat. You do not hear them directly, but you can sense the room beyond the door as a denser pocket of warmth, cedar scented and readying itself, not calling, simply there, as the deck will be there later, and the snow beyond that. The pattern begins to settle as a physical trust. You lean back at last and let the bench take more of your weight. Your shoulder blades meet the wood. Your throat opens. The pulse at the base of your neck is slower now than when you first came through the door. Your face has lost its tautness. The release has come gradually. First, the coolness on wet skin, then the easier breath, then the drying, then the steadier beat under it all. The fire gives another muted crack from within the stove room. Your feet rest flat on the pine boards. Your hands lie open on your thighs. The robe stays warming on its hook. Smoke and cedar and drying skin make a familiar braid in the air. Behind the closed sauna door, the deeper heat remains. Not gone, only paused. And after a little while, your eyes go to the outer ledge, then to the robe waiting in its gathered warmth. And beyond both, you can already remember the snow banked pale on the deck. Chapter 4. 3 breaths on the snow step, and after a little while, when your breath has lengthened enough that you no longer notice each one arriving, you're ready to go out again. You rise from the bench by the fire without hurry. The warmth there has changed shape again, less bright against the skin than it was when you first sat down, more settled into the wood, into your knees, into the backs of your hands. Your feet find the old pine boards, and for a moment, you stand with one palm resting on the edge of the bench, noticing how the heat still lives in your chest, while the air around your shoulders has cooled enough to make the next step feel easy. The door to the deck is near enough that you do not need to think about the path to it. You have already learned the room in this first round of the night. Bench, latch, threshold, the darker line of the frame, the narrow boards beyond. Behind you, from the sauna room, the stove gives one small settling tick, iron adjusting to its own heat. The sound reaches you the way a familiar household sound always does. Not as interruption, only as part of the place. Your hand closes around the latch. The metal is colder than the wood around it, and that first contact wakes the skin in your palm. You press it down slowly, feeling the catch release. A seam of brightness appears at once between door and frame. Not light exactly, but the pale lift of snow-reflected night. Cold air enters in a narrow band and touches your face first, then the damp hairline at your temples, then the hollow at the base of your throat where heat has gathered. You open the door only as wide as you need. At once, the air changes from room air to winter air, from cedar and smoke to snow and lake. It is a very clean difference, not sharp in the way of surprise, because you have come to it by stages. Sauna, bench, breath, hand on latch, but clear enough that your whole skin notices. The floorboards at the threshold are dry beneath your soles, then cooler as you step out, then cold as your bare feet meet the deck. The first contact is always exact. The boards are brushed with a thin sift of fresh snow, not yet packed, only gathered in a powdery film that gives way under your weight. You feel the grain of the wood through it, the narrow ridges where the deck boards rise and dip with age. The cold comes up through your feet immediately, precise and bright. It does not spread all at once. It begins at the soles, then the toes, then climbs a little into the arches. And because the rest of you still carries the sauna, the contrast is vivid without becoming too much. Your shoulders remember heat. Your face remembers the firelit room. Your skin steams faintly where the outer air touches it. You let the door ease nearly shut behind you, not fully latched, only close enough to narrow the seam of amber at your back. Ahead, the deck runs straight and narrow above Lake Varma. The railing is capped with fresh snow, feather light, each board carrying its own white edge. Beyond it, the lake is black in the way winter water becomes black at night. Not glossy, not moving enough to catch much light, only a dark breadth below the bank, steady and depthless from here. The far shore is mostly gone into the snowfall and the trees. The pines stand as darker shapes among the falling white, their lower boughs thickened, their upper lines half erased. You step to the place where you mean to stop. This part is simple enough that your mind does not need to arrange it. Bare feet on the deck. 3 breaths, then the snow. The first breath comes in cooler than the air inside. And because your chest is still warm from the sauna, you feel the meeting of temperatures clearly. The inhale widens under your ribs with a small, clean ache. Not unpleasant, only brisk. The air touches the back of your throat and settles there. You exhale through parted lips and see a pale cloud drift forward and disappear. On the second breath, the cold has already changed. It is no longer a first touch, but a condition, something your skin has begun to understand. The soles of your feet are colder now, and your toes press more firmly into the boards, as if to read them. The skin over your shins tightens. The dampness left by steam along your forearms cools. Somewhere behind you, through the door, the sauna heat remains close enough to be felt as a thin warmth at your back. A reminder rather than a pull. By the third breath, the initial shock has passed. Your jaw loosens instead of bracing. The inhale is smooth. The exhale leaves you more empty than before. Not in a hollow way, only with less to carry in the chest. You stay there a moment beyond the count, because there is no need to move the instant the third breath ends. The snow on the railing has thickened while you stood. Not much, only enough that the top edge looks rounder now than when you first opened the door. A few flakes land on the backs of your hands and vanish there, leaving tiny points of wet cold before the skin warms them away. Others catch in the fine hairs on your wrists. The night is not windless exactly, but the air is still enough that the flakes come almost straight down, their motion easiest to see where the amber from the doorway meets the dark over the lake. Farther out on the jetty, North Lamp burns through the snowfall. Its light is amber, lower and steadier than the glow behind you. Usually from here, you can see the reflection as a long, narrow mark on the lake, stretched and broken by the dark water. Tonight, the line is shorter. Snow passing between you and the jetty keeps softening it, blurring the edges until the reflection seems to gather itself close to the lamp and go no farther. You find your gaze resting there for a while, on that dim, interrupted stripe of amber over black. Then you bend a little and reach for the snow. The top of the railing gives under your fingers in a dry, powdery layer. It is lighter than it looks. You gather a small handful, enough to mound in your palm and over your fingertips, and at once the cold of it deepens, because loose snow settles into the creases of the hand more intimately than air does. A few grains spill through your fingers onto the deck. First, your wrists. You brush the snow over the inside of one wrist, then the other, where the skin is thin and the pulse sits close. The cold there is immediate and bright, a narrow band circling each joint. Melt begins at once, turning powder to a slick chill that runs a little toward the heel of the hand. Your fingers flex. The skin wakes under the contact, then steadies. You gather another handful. At your ankles, the sensation is different. You bend more deeply, one hand to the railing for balance, and pass the snow over the bone at one ankle, then the other. The deck boards press cold into your feet while you do it. Snow clings to damp skin for a second before melting, and the chill spreads in a ring just above each heel. Your calves tighten briefly, then release. The movement itself is useful, plain and measured, enough to keep you close to what you are doing, and nowhere else. The back of the neck comes last. You lift a final handful and bring it up beneath your hairline. The first touch there is the clearest of all. Heat has collected under the skin at the nape from the sauna and from the firelit room before it, and the snow against that place sends a bright line down your spine and outward across your shoulders. Meltwater slips under a few strands of hair and cools the upper back in thin tracks. You lower your hand and breathe out. That is the whole ritual. 3 breaths, wrists, ankles, neck. You feel the answer now in several places at once. The soles of your feet very cold and alert against the deck. The wrists alive with a narrow freshness. The back of the neck cooled into clarity. The chest still carrying heat from the sauna. The face open to the falling snow. The contrast has already evened out. Heat remains. Cold arrives. Neither drives out the other. They meet and settle. You straighten slowly and look out again over the lake. Lake Varma is nearly featureless from here tonight, and that simplicity is part of what eases you. Black water below, white gathering above and along the rails, amber behind and farther out at the jetty. The rest recedes on its own. The pines nearest the cabin still show their trunks in broken verticals between the snow-laden branches. But beyond them, the forest has become mostly depth and suggestion. You do not need more than that. The scene is simpler in the snow. Another breath comes, and this one is easier than the counted 3 were. Not deeper exactly, less deliberate. A small sound reaches you from below the deck. Not from the lake itself, but from somewhere near the shore, where dark water touches ice-dark stones. A faint hush, then nothing. It is enough to remind you that the lake is not fixed, only very still. Snow goes on falling into it, onto it, around it, changing the surface in ways too fine to see from above. You brush your fingertips together to shed the last wet crystals. The cold has begun to bite more firmly now at the pads of your toes and along the outer edges of your feet. That, too, is part of the timing. The point is not to stay until discomfort grows heavy. Only long enough for the air and snow to mark the skin. Long enough for your breath to clear. Long enough for the warmth you carry from inside to meet the winter and become something cleaner. When you turn, the amber seam around the door looks warmer than it did a minute ago. You reach for the latch from the outside. Snow has settled in a fine line along the upper edge of the frame, and a little has gathered on the back of your hand while you stood. The handle is cold, but now your palm expects it. You press it down and pull the door open. Heat meets you low and immediate. First at the shins, then the hands, then the face as you step into the threshold. The difference is almost visible in the air, though what you notice most is not sight, but the way your skin loosens. The boards inside are dry. The scent changes again. Cedar, warmed wool near the door, a trace of smoke beneath it, and the mineral warmth from the stove beyond. For a moment, you remain just there, half in one temperature and half in the other, letting the crossing complete itself. Melt water from the snow step cools your wrists as the indoor heat reaches them. Your ankles begin to warm from the floor upward. At the back of your neck, the last of the snow becomes a thin run of water, and then nothing. Behind the sauna door, the stove answers with another tiny tick from its iron side, as if some small seam has settled. You ease the outer door shut until the latch catches. The night remains on the other side of it, close and white, and steadily falling over the railing, over the jetty, over the dark lake. North Lamp continues through the snow, its reflection shorter now than before. Inside, your feet leave faint, damp marks on the boards as you cross back toward the inner room. The warmth does not rush at you. It gathers in the places the cold has just touched. First in the soles, then the wrists, then the back of the neck, until the whole exchange feels complete. Chapter 5. Returning to the quiet shelf. Inside, your feet leave faint, damp marks on the boards as you cross back toward the inner room. The warmth does not rush at you. It gathers in the places the cold has just touched. First in the soles, then the wrists, then the back of the neck, until the whole exchange begins to feel less like stepping out and coming back than like one round of breath completed. You pause just inside the doorway between the little firelit room and the sauna. The air here is warmer than the deck and cooler than the bench beyond. The skin at your forearms prickles once, then settles. Your toes, which had tightened against the snow-bright boards outside, begin to spread again against the pine floor. Somewhere behind the stove wall, the fire shifts lower through the birch, and the iron answers with one dry tick. By the door, the felt hat has warmed where you left it. You lift it from the hook and turn it once in your hands. The wool has taken on the room's heat without losing its shape. When you settle it over your head again, the band sits lower and more comfortably than before, covering the ears a little better, taking the edge from the heat that gathers high in the room. The gesture is small and familiar. The second round is easier. Your hands know where to go. The sauna door opens with the same weight as before, but your shoulder meets it more easily now. Cedar dark warmth meets your face, and beneath it, the mineral scent of heated stone, the iron breath of the stove, the faint, dry sweetness of the upper bench. The room is unchanged. The first time you took in each part separately. The boards, the bucket, the stove, the bench. Now the room arrives all at once, and your body answers all at once too, because your body already knows what comes next. You step in and ease the door nearly shut behind you. The seam of firelight narrows. The sounds narrow with it. The adjoining room drops to a muffled presence on the other side of the wood, and the sauna gathers around the ear in simpler forms. The mild crackle from within the stove, the faint movement of your own breath. The quiet shelf is warmer than when you left it. The bench is warmer than before. When you sit, the bench gives that first clear contact at the backs of the thighs, and then, within a breath or two, begins to feel less like a surface beneath you than like warmth meeting warmth. The towel under you has lost its earlier coolness. The cedar releases a honey scent where the heat has drawn it out. Resin and wood, and something faintly sweet that is most noticeable when you stop looking for it. You shift once, finding the place on the bench where the heat gathers evenly at shoulder height. The hat lowers the intensity above your brow. Your spine lengthens without effort. The shoulders come down a little farther than before. Even your hands, when you set them beside you on the bench, do not brace against the heat now. They rest there and accept it. Across from you, the stove sits squat and dark, its iron sides matte in the low amber light. The stones stacked above the firebox have changed since the first round. Earlier, they seemed dry and watchful in their stillness. Now they carry a fuller heat, one that reaches beyond the immediate skin and settles further in, through chest and upper arms, and the hinge of the jaw. You can feel the difference before water ever touches them. The room is slightly hotter now. The copper bucket stands where you left it, near the bench leg, its side dimly reflecting the stove's glow. A bead of water that had once clung to it has long since dried. Another faint mark, left by a damp hand or a drip from the ladle, has already begun to vanish into warmth. You lean forward and take up Arrow's birch ladle by the darkened handle. Birch always feels right in the hand here, neither too cold after standing, nor too hot after use. Only smooth and balanced, as if it were made for this exact, repeated motion. The water in the bucket is still cold, You feel it through the ladle as you dip and lift. That contrast, too, is part of what you trust now. The hand rising through cool weight, the wrist turning, the brief suspended moment over the stones. Then the pour. The first contact is a low, immediate hiss. Not sharp, but full. Water threads over the upper stones, disappears between them, and at once, the steam rises in a rounded wave. The stove answers with its familiar metallic tick. Then another, as the iron settles to the change. That sound, heard once before, no longer draws your attention as something to interpret. It simply marks the moment the room shifts. The lowly reaches you first at the face and throat, then across the shoulders, then lower, spreading over chest and upper back in a broad sheet. You breathe in through the nose, and the air is no longer dry. It carries mineral heat, softened by water, fuller and more forgiving than the heat before it. Your lips part on the exhale. The breath leaves longer than you expected. This time, you receive the steam more simply. It travels under the felt brim and around your temples, settles at the collarbones and under the shoulder blades. The muscles along the neck release in increments, so small they would be easy to miss in a busier room, on a busier night. Here, nothing interrupts them. You lean back against the wall, just enough to let the cedar support part of your weight. The boards are hot, but not uncomfortable, and the pressure between shoulder and timber gives another point of steadiness. The room does not need to be measured anymore. It has already shown you its range. The bench will hold. The stove will answer. The steam will rise and pass through you. Outside, the cold will still be there when it is time again. You stop thinking about each step. Another ladleful. Again, the pour, the hiss, the little succession of iron ticks. Again, the steam rounds upward from the olivine diabase and spreads through the upper half of the room before descending. The sound is almost domestic in its familiarity now, as ordinary and dependable as wood settling in a wall, or a kettle beginning to stir. You watch the stones darken where the water lands, and lighten again as it vanishes. Their surfaces are uneven, dense, close-fitted by long use. Heat lives in them with patience. What they return to the room is not abrupt. It arrives broad and complete. Your skin no longer reads the sauna simply as hot. It has begun to sort the heat into textures. There is the dry warmth of the cedar beneath your palm, the denser pulse from the stove side of the room, the moving layer of steam that passes over the forearms and throat, the deeper afterheat still stored in you from the deck and the snow at your neck. These layers do not compete. They settle one over another until the body stops reacting to each one separately and begins to rest inside the whole. You notice your jaw because it has unclenched further. The tongue lies easier in the mouth. The space behind the eyes feels less bright. Even the small muscles at the base of the skull, which often stay working long after the rest of you has sat down, begin to lose interest in their work. Heat reaches places that thought rarely reaches directly. It enters by contact and time. The felt hat helps. Earlier, it was simply part of the ritual, lifted from the hook and placed on without much thought. Now, warmed through, it feels almost shaped to you. The wool rests lightly at the forehead, and where it covers the ears, the room seems to narrow in the most useful way. Sound dims a little. Not silence, just less edge. The stove's settling ticks come from a shorter distance. Your own breathing is nearer. When you swallow, you hear it in the warm cave of the hat and steam. You stretch your legs a little farther along the bench. The backs of the knees loosen. Ankles uncross. The soles, cold only a few moments ago on the snow-dusted deckboards, now carry a returning warmth that feels almost granular, as if each toe were waking, one by one. Your wrists remember the brushed snow too. The pulse there had sharpened in the cold. Now it moves under skin that has gone from brisk to warm to nearly indistinguishable from the rest of you. You lift the ladle once more, slower this time. The birch handle, dark with years of damp and drying, fits your grip as though the hand has remembered an old instruction. The water arcs in a thinner stream. The hiss is softer, but lasts longer, and the steam that follows is less a wave than a gradual thickening. The iron on the stove side answers with 3 tiny settling ticks, spaced apart. You hear each one, but none of them asks to be followed. The heat gathers around your shoulders and upper chest, then eases lower. It reaches the small of the back, where tension can stay hidden, even after the larger muscles have let go. It moves through the hips, where they meet the bench. It finds the fronts of the ankles, the thin skin behind the knees, the place at the center of the sternum, where a held breath often begins. You do not need to direct any of this. The room does it by being what it is. For a while, you stop adjusting. That may be the clearest sign that the second entry has gone deeper. Earlier, there was still a little arrangement to be made. Where to put the hands, how high to sit, when to add water, what the face made of the heat. Now you are simply here. The bench supports. The hat shields. The stove keeps its steady work. Breath lengthens without your help. Beyond the door, beyond the small pause space and the deck, the lake remains black under the falling snow. You do not need to look at it to know it is there. The knowledge is enough. It gives shape to the contrast that will return later. Warm cedar here, bright cold there, then cedar again. That structure has already begun to take root in you. It is becoming trustworthy in the way of repeated things, through use, not promise. A little moisture gathers at your temples, and along the line where the hat meets the skin. One drop moves down beside the ear and disappears into the warmth at your neck. Your hands have grown heavy on the bench. When you lift one to rest it over the other, even that small movement feels unhurried, as though the heat has reached into the joints and taken away unnecessary effort. The cedar's honey scent deepens when the steam passes. Not stronger exactly, but rounder, released from the warmed grain in brief intervals. You breathe it with the mineral air from the stones. The room smells of wood, iron, and a trace of old smoke woven so far into the boards that it appears only at the edges of a tension. Nothing about it is new. That is part of its ease. The place does not need to surprise you to affect you. Another minute passes, or several. Time in here loosens from counting. You know only that the second round has become fuller than the first, and that your body has accepted this without argument. The shoulders are lower. The face is less arranged. The breath, when it leaves, goes all the way out. Soon enough, there will be the middle room again, the bench by the firelight, the latch, the deck, the 3 breaths over snow, but not yet. For now, you remain on the quiet shelf, hat warmed into place, steam thinning and returning, the stove answering each change with its small iron language. By now, you trust the routine. And because you trust it, you can sink a little further into the cedar heat and let the room continue its work. Chapter 6. Mineral water. Soft steam. You stay where you are for a little while longer, high on the cedar bench, until the last round of steam has thinned and the air grows clearer again. Heat lies evenly across your shoulders and upper arms. Beneath you, the quiet shelf has stored the warmth of the room so fully that the wood no longer feels like a surface separate from you. It feels simply warm and solid and known. Your breath has changed since you first came in. You notice that without needing to think very much about it. The inhale no longer catches at the top. The exhale reaches farther down, loosening the ribs, the jaw, the place between the shoulder blades where the weak often gathers first. The mind still moves, but more slowly now, and with less insistence. It does not need to lead. After a time, you lower your feet to the bench step, and then to the floor. The boards underfoot are hot, but not sharp with heat. Your hand passes briefly along the cedar wall for balance, fingertips reading the grain without really tracing it. The felt hat stays on. It is warmed through so completely that you barely notice its weight. Only the way it keeps the highest heat from pressing too hard at the crown of your head. Beside the bench, the copper bucket has dropped a little from its earlier fullness. It's low enough that you need to refill it. A few darkened streaks mark where water sloshed against its inside when it was carried. And on the outer wall, 2 droplets have gathered from damp hands and steam. They catch the amber light for a moment, then begin to slip downward in narrow paths. One reaches the bucket's lower curve and clings there. The other thins to almost nothing before the warmth dries it away. Even that small vanishing seems to point toward what comes next. You bend and take up the handle. The metal bale is warm near the top, where the room has worked on it. Cooler where your fingers close. The bucket gives a compact, familiar heft, lighter than before, and because of that, more persuasive. Not heavy, exactly, but honest. The door into the adjoining room opens with the same eased movement as before, and the change in air meets your face at once. Less heat here, more space around it. Firelight from the other stove lays a low amber band across the old pine floorboards. You cross it without hurry, carrying the bucket at your side, and the water shifts with a muted lap against copper. The bucket is nearly empty. At the hand pump, you set the bucket down on the boards. The pump handle is colder than the bucket's bail, and smoother where many hands have worn it. You wrap your fingers around it and begin the short, steady stroke. Down and up, down and up. The mechanism answers with its plain iron rhythm. And then the first thread of water arrives. It falls bright and narrow into the pail, striking copper with a clean note before gathering into itself. You can hear the difference between the first inch and the second. At first, the sound rings more sharply, metal answering water. Then, as the level rises, the tone deepens and rounds out. The water from the pump is very cold. Even from where you stand, you can feel something of that cold in the freshness of its scent. Cold and mineral clear. Your hand keeps the rhythm. You keep the strokes even. There is no need to rush the filling, though the wanting in it is plain enough. The handle lifts, settles, lifts again. Your shoulders move with it in an easy pattern. The wrist flexes. The palm warms against the iron. The bucket grows heavy again. Soon, it is nearly full enough. You stop before the brim. Sauna water is best carried with room to move. Enough space for the ladle to dip without spilling over your knuckles. For a moment, you leave the bucket there and rest your hand on its rim. The copper is cool where the fresh water has changed it, and warmer higher up where the room's heat still remains. That narrow band between temperatures feels distinct under your skin. You notice it, the way you notice the edge of a wool cuff or the seam of a well-made glove. Not important, but exact. Then you lift the bucket again and return to the sauna. Inside, the heat receives you more quickly than before. It does not need introducing now. The air settles over your damp forearms, your neck, the fronts of your knees. You place the bucket back beside the bench, where the light from the stove catches its matte side in a low, red-brown glow. Fresh droplets bead at the rim from the recent pumping. One gathers enough weight to travel down the outer wall, leaving a darker track behind it. Before it reaches the floor, the warmth begins to take it back. You sit once more on the upper bench. The movement has become simpler with repetition. One hand to the wood, one foot up, then the other, hips turning, shoulders finding their place against the cedar wall. The towel beneath you is warm through its full fold. The hat stays settled. Your hands rest on your thighs for a few breaths, palms down first, then turned upward when the skin there asks for more air. Across from you, the stove keeps its own steady presence. Iron darkened by years of heat. Stones stacked above the firebox in a dense, irregular mass. Each piece fitted by hand and use, rather than by neatness. The olivine diabase holds warmth differently from lighter stone. You can feel that now without needing to name it. The heat it gives back is full-bodied, gathered deep, not quick to flare and not quick to leave. Even before water touches it, the stones shape the room. Looking at them, you feel again the cold in the bucket at your calf, and the simple certainty of what will happen when one meets the other. You lean forward and reach for Arrow's birch ladle. The handle, worn smooth and dark by long use, fits your hand without adjustment. Birch does that well in a place like this. It stays comfortable through damp and heat, neither slick nor biting. Your thumb finds an old, flattened place near the top, where many thumbs have pressed before. Not a mark you study, just a familiar resting point. You dip the ladle in slowly. Ladle bowl descending, surface breaking, water entering with a small, hollow glug. When you lift it, a thin thread falls back from the rim for a second before separating cleanly. The cold in the ladle is immediate against your fingers through the wood. Not enough to chill, only enough to register as contrast. Heat in the room, cold in the hand. The contrast is immediate. You bring the ladle toward the stones and pause. Not ceremonially, just naturally. Enough time to place the wrist. Enough time to choose where the water will go. Enough time for the stones to seem almost to wait. Then you tip it. The first contact is a brief, bright sound. Not a splash, but a swift taking in. Water touches the hottest surfaces and disappears from sight almost at once. A low hiss follows, then broadens. Steam rises not in a violent rush, but in a rounded wave, opening from the stones and lifting into the room with a kind of weightless fullness. The iron sides of the stove answer a second later with a few small settling ticks. You sit back and let the lowly come to you. At first, it passes over your shins and knees, then climbs. It gathers at the chest and shoulders, then around the sides of the face. The skin receives it before thought does. Pores open, the lips part. The breath shortens for one inhale, then finds its longer path again as the steam spreads and evens. What was cold and mineral bright in the bucket is already becoming something softer, denser, more inhabitable. The cedar behind your back grows hotter by degrees. Not all at once. The warmth presses more distinctly between the shoulder blades and along the small of the back where the towel has shifted thin. Your hands, which had cooled a little during the walk to the pump, begin to recover their heat. Fingertips first, then the palms, then the wrists. You turn one hand over and watch moisture gather there in a sheen before disappearing. Another ladleful. This time, less water. A smaller pour spread over a different face of stone. The sound is softer, more granular, as if each stone answers in its own register before the notes blend. Steam rises again, and because the room is already prepared for it, the wave feels less like arrival and more like continuation. You do not brace. Your ribs widen. Your jaw loosens from hinges you had forgotten were still holding. The bucket sits close by your calf. From time to time, a drop from the ladle's rim lands on the copper edge and runs down. The pail wears those tracks briefly, then loses them. Warmth dries what remains on the outer wall, leaving the surface matte again. The cycle repeats in miniature there too. Cold water lifted, carried, spilled in traces, then returned to air. On the stones, the same thing happens at larger scale, and in you as well. You find yourself listening closely to the sequence of sounds, not because you are trying to, but because there are so few that matter now. Ladle into water, water leaving wood, stone receiving it. Hiss, tick, breath. A small shift of towel against cedar. Nothing else is needed. The world beyond the room has narrowed to a useful size. Even the deck and the snow, though they remain part of the night, have moved farther out in your awareness for the moment. Here, what matters is timing, and the body's trust in what timing brings. You take up the ladle again and let it fill a little deeper. The bowl comes up heavy and clear. A single bead hangs from the underside, trembling with the movement of your hand. It falls onto the floor before you pour, leaving a dark dot between the boards. The dot stays for a few breaths, and then fades as the heat takes that too. This third pour is slower. You spread it across the upper stones in a thin line, rather than dropping it in one place. The response changes at once. The hiss lasts longer, lower, and more sustained. And the steam that rises from it feels broader, less pointed at the front edge. It moves around your shoulders and over the hat, then down along your upper arms, as though the air itself has thickened into something more cushioning. The room deepens with it. Not hotter only, but more complete. Your eyes lower without fully closing. Through your lashes, the stove becomes shape and dim shine. The bucket, a darker curve near the bench leg. The cedar wall, bands of warm brown and shadow. Attention settles deepest into touch. Heat at the sternum. Dampness at the temples. A line of sweat moving from the side of the neck toward the collarbone. The place behind the knees growing almost loose enough to feel boneless. The quiet that follows is not emptiness now, but a kind of filled stillness, as if the body has been brought back into itself, one layer at a time. The room does not require interpretation. Water on hot stone becomes steam. Steam meets skin. Skin answers by opening. Breath answers by lengthening. It is enough to let one thing follow the next. After a while, you notice the mineral scent of the fresh pump water still present beneath the cedar and iron, changed now by heat, not gone, only transformed. What was sharp and cold in the bucket has become rounder in the air, less like spring water at the hand, and more like stone after rain. The olivine diabase gives the steam that dense, full quality. You can feel it in the way the lowly does not strike and vanish, but stays long enough to settle over the skin before thinning. The replenishment is complete now, only because it has ceased to be water alone. The stove gives another tiny series of ticks as its sides adjust. Somewhere below the stones, the fire continues its measured work among alder and birch. You do not look toward the firebox. You know it by the heat it maintains, by the faint, dry scent braided into the room, by the steadiness with which the stones continue to answer. You ladle once more, this time barely half a bowl, just enough to refresh the air. The hiss is brief and intimate. Steam rises in a modest swell and brushes the face, the throat, the upper chest. Your exhale leaves you in a long stream. Shoulders descend another small degree. The muscles at the base of the skull soften under the hat's rim. The body grows quieter still, not emptied, but settled more deeply into its own warmth. Then you stop. The ladle returns to its place beside the bucket with a low wooden tap. You sit back fully against the cedar wall and let the room carry the rest. The fresh steam disperses gradually, becoming less visible and more felt than seen. The bucket's outer surface dries almost completely now, except for one narrow bead near the handle that continues its slow descent. By the time it reaches the lower curve, it has become so thin you can barely see it. Then that, too, is taken. Your hands rest again on your thighs. The palms are warm now, all the way through. The breath moves without effort. Inhale through heat touched by water. Exhale into heat touched by cedar. The mind, having less to arrange, settles into the body's simpler work of noticing. Soon enough, there will be the bench by the firelight again. And after that, the latch, the boards of the deck, the 3 breaths over snow. But not yet. For now, the craft of this part is complete. Bucket filled, ladle lifted, stones fed, steam returned to air. You remain on the quiet shelf while the last of it moves around you, and the room, once more, grows easier to inhabit than thought, with the next threshold faintly waiting. Chapter 7. North Lamp Through Falling Snow. By the time you leave the heat again, the steam has thinned to a warm dampness along your forearms and throat. The bench, the bucket, the stove, the cedar walls have already become known enough that you do not need to take them in all at once. Your hand finds the latch by habit. The felt hat still keeps a little stored warmth over your crown. Behind it, your hairline is damp. Under your feet, the boards near the door are warmer than the ones farther out. And that narrow gradient is enough to tell you where you are without looking. You ease into the adjoining room first, not yet to the deck. Firelight lays a low amber band across the old pine floorboards. The wool robe remains on the juniper hook, fuller now with warmth than when you first hung it there, its weight visible in the way it settles from the peg. You do not take it down. This time you don't need the robe. A brief pause is enough. Your skin changes as you stand there. The stronger sauna heat leaves first from the face and shoulders, then more slowly from the chest and hands. Sweat cools in a thin film along your neck. It is not a chill exactly, more a sharpening of outline, as if your wrists, your jaw, the backs of your knees become distinct again after the blur of steam. The fire gives a faint resin smoke note from the alder kindling beneath the birch. Somewhere beyond the inner wall, the iron sides of the stove answer the last ladle with one more settling tick. Then the outer latch. The metal touches your thumb with a cold so exact it seems narrower than the latch itself. You press it down. The door opens inward with its familiar drag over the threshold, and the night appears at once in front of you. Deck boards brushed pale, railing capped in fresh snow, the dark cut of the lake below. The cold reaches your face before your feet cross fully out. It has changed since the last time. Now the snow has thickened. It does not fall in dramatic swirls. It comes steadily, in slanting white threads and small drifting clusters, enough to shorten distance without disturbing the stillness. The pines beyond the deck are less separate from one another. Their trunks still stand where you know they stand, but their farther branches have gone faint, as if the night has drawn a veil of ground glass through the forest. You step onto the boards. Bare feet meet cold wood and a sift of fresh powder. The snow has gathered again since your last crossing, feather light over the grain, and it gives way at once under your soles. Beneath it, the deck is firmer and colder than the floor inside, but not harsh. Heat from the sauna still lives in your ankles and arches, and for a moment, the two temperatures meet there, one rising, one entering. You pause on the snow step for the first breath. Cold air comes in through the nose, with a brightness that reaches behind the eyes. Your ribs widen against it. The amber seam from the doorway warms the backs of your calves. The second breath. Snow touches the railing and stays. A few flakes land on the fine, damp hairs of your forearm and melt so quickly you feel them less as impact than as tiny points of coolness spreading. The third breath. Your mouth parts on the exhale. The lake below remains black, but not flat black. Near the shore, there is a darkened sheen where the little light available can still rest for a moment before dissolving. You look for North Lamp. North Lamp is there, though dimmer now. Its amber glow comes through the snowfall as a rounded blur rather than a defined flame. Earlier, its reflection had run down into the lake in a narrow line. Now that line is broken and softened. Snow moves through it. Water receives it and lets it go. The reflection appears, smears, and nearly disappears. then returns in a shorter mark. You stop trying to sharpen it. The lamp is not gone. It has simply moved farther back inside the weather. You bend and gather a little fresh powder from the railing top. It compresses instantly against your fingertips, then loosens again. You brush it over one wrist, then the other. The cold there is precise and immediate where the pulse runs near the skin. After that, your ankles. Snow grains cling briefly to the damp warmth above your heels before melting. Last, the back of the neck, where the felt hat leaves a small, exposed crescent. That touch is always the clearest. It sends a quick line of coolness downward between the shoulders, and then fades into something cleaner, flatter, less urgent than heat. When you straighten, the world has narrowed another degree. The pines around the cabin are still present, but only the nearest boughs carry detail now. Dark needles burdened with white, the lower branches bent under fresh accumulation. A clump of snow dropping from one limb to another with hardly any sound at all. Beyond them, the forest is reduced to verticals and shadowed masses. You know the path runs away from the deck and between those trunks. You know the shore curves. You know the jetty reaches out where North Lamp stands. But knowledge is enough. Sight no longer has to carry everything. The reduced view is a relief. Your eyes stop traveling so far. They no longer move from tree line to lake edge to sky and back, trying to take the whole scene at once. They settle on nearer things. The ridge of snow along the railing, the dark, wet marks your feet have left on the boards, the amber rectangle of the doorway just behind you. Distances shorten, edges blur. There is less to sort. A flake lands on your lower lip and vanishes. Another catches in the wool at the shoulder of the robe, still hanging just inside the door, visible past the jamb. It will melt there and leave a dark pinprick before the warmth takes it. You notice this, and nothing follows from it. Snow falls, light dims, breath enters, breath leaves. You rest one hand on the top rail. Fresh powder collapses under your palm, and beneath it, the wood is cold enough to make your skin tighten. A little ridge of snow pushes against the base of your thumb. Looking down from there, you can just make out where the deck posts descend toward the slope above the lake. Their lower halves are already less clear in the thickening fall. Between them, the black water receives a few flakes that show for an instant before they are gone. From this angle, North Lamp nearly disappears altogether. Not extinguished, only filtered. Its amber is now a suggestion more than a point, and the reflection below it has become so abbreviated that your eye could almost mistake it for a stain on the water. Then the snow shifts, and the glow returns, weak and rounded. You find yourself content with that uncertainty. The cold begins to reach deeper now, not abruptly, but in stages you recognize. First, the dampness on your skin cools through. Then the outer surfaces of the arms. Then the fronts of the thighs, where the air touches most directly. The stored heat in your chest and belly remains for longer. And because it remains, the The cold outlines the warmth still in you. Behind you, from inside, comes a faint wooden sound as the inner room settles. A board answering weight no longer on it, or the minute shift of heat in the frame near the stove room. The fire itself is not visible from here, only its amber spill. Yet that color on the threshold is enough to keep the route simple. Board, door, latch, bench, then cedar again. You do not need to think ahead to it. The sequence is already in the body. For another breath or two, you stay where you are, not because the ritual requires more, but because the snowfall has changed the view in a way worth receiving. The sky no longer reads as sky so much as pale motion above the darker trees. The far shore, if it can be seen at all tonight, has withdrawn behind the moving white. Lake Pharma is reduced to what lies nearest the cabin, and the little portion of black water beneath the lamp. The rest can remain unpictured. The deck is enough. The railing is enough. The lamp, dim through snow, is enough. You do not need the whole lake when one section of it is visible below you, dark and level and untroubled. You do not need the whole forest when the nearest pines show their burdened branches and the rest recede. The week outside this place had too many surfaces, too many distances to scan. Your feet press more firmly into the boards, as if to answer the cold. The wood has begun to feel almost warm by comparison with the air on your hands. Your toes curl once, then release. At the edges of your ears, under the felt hat, the temperature has sharpened. At the back of the neck, the melted snow has already become only cool skin again. One more look toward the jetty. North Lamp glows through the fall, like amber seen through frosted glass. Its reflection reaches down only a little way now, before the moving veil cuts it apart. For a few seconds, you can follow it. Then, not at all. The snowfall keeps hiding and revealing the lamp. Nothing in that feels like loss. It is simply a smaller field. When you turn back toward the door, the amber from inside appears stronger than before. The threshold boards are damp where you stepped out. Fresh flakes settle into those dark prints and begin to erase their edges. Your hand leaves a brief hollow in the snow along the rail as you let go. The latch is colder now than when you first touched it. Your thumb knows that before it meets the metal. You press it down and step in, carrying with you the clean sting at the wrists, the cooled line at the neck, the darker image of the lake with its nearly vanished lamp. The door closes behind you with a muted wooden contact, and at once, the air changes shape around your face. Not all at once warm, not yet. First, less cold. Then, the faint smoke note from alder and birch again. Then, the stored heat in the little room, finding your hands, your shins, your cheeks. Snow melts from your skin in places too small to notice separately. The robe on the hook gives off a little wool warmth as you pass it. Beyond, through the next door, cedar and stone are waiting in their usual order, and you move toward them already simplified by the weather outside. carrying fewer edges back in than you took out. Chapter 8. The Older Heat. You ease through the inner door again, and the heat feels familiar now. Not the first arrival of the night, when every surface had to be learned one by one. This time, the room gathers around you by habit. Cedar at shoulder height, iron warmth near the stove, the faint mineral brightness that rises from stone and water before steam has even formed. Your skin still carries the memory of snow along the wrists and ankles, but it is fading now, giving way to the deeper warmth stored in the bench, the boards, the air itself. The felt hat keeps the top of your head in its own dry climate. Beneath it, your brow loosens almost at once. You close the door until only a narrow seam remains, then let it settle shut. The latch makes its familiar contact. After that, the room returns to the lesser sounds. One bead of water slipping from your forearm to the floorboard, the low fire behind iron, the small answer from the stove as its metal adjusts to its own heat. You sit on the quiet shelf and feel how much warmer the cedar has become since the earlier rounds. The wood has taken in hours of heat and has begun to give it back in a steadier way. Not as a surface shock, but as something broad and even, through the towel, through the backs of your thighs, through the line of your spine. The bench offers the same temperature it offered before, only more fully settled. Your shoulders drop a little without instruction. Your hands, when you rest them beside you, no longer hover uncertainly in the heat. They simply stay. The smoke note is different in here than it is in the adjoining room. Tervalepa from the alder kindling lies underneath the birch in the scent, darker and finer. Wet heat lifts it from the boards near the stove, from the seams in the cedar, from the iron itself. Not fresh smoke, not anything sharp. More like alder bark warmed under birch and stone until it turns soft and deep in the nose. You notice it most near the stove. The Ito stands squat and dark, carrying its load of stone above the firebox. And beneath that mass of heat, the birch logs have gone farther inward. Earlier, the fire had a brighter appetite. Now it works lower and redder. Through the small seam around the stove door, the color is not flame so much as ember light, compact and steady. You can imagine the split birch settled over the alder bed, edges collapsing into each other, bark darkening, the centers turning from solid wood into that red, grainy glow that gives heat for a long time after the quick burning is done. It is the older way, you think. The copper bucket stands where it has stood all evening, matte in the amber light, a darkened crescent of damp still clinging near its base. Beside it rests Arrow's birch ladle. The handle has been worn smooth in the hand over so many nights that there is no splinter, no roughness left to catch the palm. Even after sitting near heat, it stays comfortable to hold. Not hot, not slick, not reluctant. When you reach for it, your fingers close around it as if they already know the weight. The bowl dips. The handle settles into the groove between thumb and palm, and the fit is so easy, you feel your grip soften around it. You dip the ladle into the bucket and hear the small, enclosed note of water against copper. The sound is brighter than the room around it. Cold still lives in that water. Mineral bright, drawn from the pump not long ago, it has not forgotten where it came from. You lift the ladle and pause. The stones need no hurry. When the water lands on the upper stones, the first sound is precise. Then it opens. A rounded hiss, full rather than sharp, rises from the olivine diabase and spreads upward before it spreads out. The steam reaches your face a moment later, then your chest, then the backs of your arms. It slips under your chin and along the sternum, gathers at the collarbones, dampens the fine hairs at your wrists. The stove gives a series of tiny settling ticks after the ladle empties, each one distinct, each one already familiar enough not to ask for your attention. You breathe in through your nose, and the heat is almost sweet with cedar. Breathe out, and the exhale leaves more slowly than the one before it. Your jaw has less to do now. The place between your shoulder blades, which carried itself upright all week, as if ready for one more task, begins to flatten and widen. Even the fronts of your ankles, still remembering the deck boards and the snow pressed over them, release their last little brace. For a while, you do nothing else. The steam thins. The stones keep their heat. Your chest rises and falls under the same air that has passed over timber, iron, water, and fire. Cedar warms and scents. Iron stores and answers. Stone receives and returns. Birch burns down to red and gives what it has. You lean back a little more against the cedar wall and find a warmer patch. The boards almost silky with long use where your shoulders meet them. Heat presses there first, then spreads across the upper back. The grain shows more clearly where the light catches it, darkened in places by damp hands, steam, years of bodies leaning and rising again, fire laid beneath stone, water lifted by hand, bench warmed, emptied, warmed again. The repetition is in the wood itself, in the shine worn into the ladle handle, in the way your body recognizes where to rest before your mind does. The stove gives another small tick, then settles. Behind its door, the embers draw inward with a faint sighing sound. Not quite a collapse, more the soft settling of weight as one charred edge gives way and another takes its place. You hear it and know without looking that the heart of the fire has lowered a little. You relax with it. The tension in your chest loosens and drops, as if it, too, has found a place to rest. You reach again for the ladle, this time with even less thought. The birch handle fits into the curve of your hand, as if it had been shaped there. Arrows, everyone still calls it, though the ladle has belonged to the room for so long that the name feels less like ownership than continuity. Someone chose it, used it, set it back beside the bucket, and then did the same thing again the next night, and the next. The handle darkened where fingers returned to the same place. That is enough to leave a trace. Another ladleful. Another pause. Another pour. This steam rises thicker. Not hotter exactly, but more complete. It rolls upward from the stones and reaches beneath the felt hat to the edges of your temples, along your collarbones, across the upper chest where the heat first gathers and then spreads. Your forearms shine briefly with moisture. A drop forms at the point of one elbow and falls. The room smells a little more strongly now of wet stone, warm cedar, and that faint alder note under the birch, as if the water has lifted every material into clearer relief for a few moments before they blend again. You let your eyes lower. With your eyes lowered, the room reduces to a few shapes. Amber seam around the stove door. Copper bucket dimly lit beside the bench leg. Boards darkened where damp feet crossed earlier and have nearly dried now. The grain of the cedar opposite you, rising in narrow lines. Your own hands resting palm down, fingers uncurling one by one, as if they have remembered they are not needed. The steam passes. The room dries a little. Heat remains. It is enough. Another ember sound comes from behind the stove door. A soft, inward settling. And with it, a faint change in the scent. Less of active fire, more of wood transformed. You know this stage by color, even without seeing it clearly. The birch no longer shaped as logs, only as red structure with black edges. The alder long folded into it. The whole bed of fuel carrying itself from within. You do not need to open anything now. The room tells you, and your body believes it. You sit inside that older heat and let it work without naming every place it reaches. The backs of the knees, the small of the back, the sternum, the hollows beneath the collarbones, where cooler air once sat and no longer does. Your wrists, brushed with snow not long ago, are fully warm again. So are your ankles, the back of your neck, where the powder-touched skin now gives off the last trace of cold and returns to the common temperature of the room. If a thought comes, it comes slowly and leaves the same way. Not because you push it off, but because there is less space for it to gather speed. Sit, breathe, lift water, pour. Feel the steam rise and thin. Listen to the iron answer. Listen to the embers settle lower. Let the bench carry what it can. You open your eyes once more and look toward the stove. The iron side catches a dull amber edge. The bucket beside it has nearly stopped beating. The warmth dries what little remains on its outer wall. The ladle rests across the rim now, handle angled toward you for the next time. Nothing in the arrangement needs changing. After another stretch of stillness, you lean forward just enough to hear the fire more clearly. Behind the stove door, there is one last inward hush as a pocket of embers shifts and compacts. Then, the metal gives a tiny reply. Not a crack, not a knock. Just that familiar, settled tick, as if the whole stove has eased a fraction deeper into itself. You stay where you are and receive it. The cedar under your palms is hot, but not too hot. The grain raised faintly where years of steam have worked it smooth. The hat is dry. The air is dense with warmth, and only a faint remnant of the last steam. Alder beneath birch, ember beneath stone, water beside hand, breath moving in its slower measure. The week hasn't vanished, but it has gone quiet. So you sit a little longer on the quiet shelf, while the older heat continues in its patient order. The stove holding, the stones holding, the bench holding, and the next breath comes easier than the one before. Chapter 9. Wool, Cedar, Breath. So you sit a little longer on the quiet shelf, while the older heat continues in its patient order, and the next breath comes easier than the one before. After a while, you notice that you stop thinking about the next step. Earlier in the night, each part of the round had still carried a faint outline before it arrived. Steam, bench, door, snow, return. Now the edges between them have thinned. You remain where you are, shoulders against cedar, warmed through to its deeper sweetness. And the thought of moving comes without urgency. Heat rests across the tops of your thighs, along your ribs, at the back of your neck beneath the felt hat. Your hands lie open on the towel beside you, not gripping, not arranging themselves into any useful shape. They have become simply hands again. The bench under you has stored the room's heat for hours. Through the towel, you can feel the cedar's even temperature. Not hot at one point and cool at another, but settled all the way through the grain. When you shift your weight by the smallest amount, a honeyed resin scent rises where your shoulder leaves the wall and returns again. The boards at shoulder height have their own breath in this warmth, dry and faintly sweet, different from the iron note near the stove, and different again from the mineral trace that hangs in the air after steam. You can tell them apart without effort now. The stove gives one of its small metallic ticks. It is enough to bring your eyes there for a moment. The iron sides sit dark and steady. Heat moves from it without show. The stones above have already given back the last ladle in a full, rounded exhale. And what remains in the room is the softened after effect of it. Warmth gathered high, a little drier near the bench edge, denser at the level of your chest. You breathe in through your nose, and the cedar comes first, then a trace of warmed wool from the hat, then the faint older smoke memory from alder under birch. The order changes from breath to breath, but only slightly. When you rise this time, you do not do it all at once. One hand presses to the bench. Your feet find the lower slat, then the floor. The boards answer with that muted give of old timber, familiar beneath bare soles. Heat has made your skin feel larger than usual, as if it notices the room before the rest of you does. The latch is warm when your fingers close around it. You open the door between sauna and deck only as far as needed to pass through into the little pause space, and the air there meets you already halfway changed. Not cold, not even cool at first, just less full. That difference is enough to wake a want in the body. Your shoulders, relieved of the bench and the wall, seem at once to know what they are missing and what they want next. Not more steam yet, not the outer cold, but wait. Your skin, still warm from the sauna, wants the robe. You step across to the juniper hook, already wanting the robe before your hand reaches it. It has been warming by the door for hours without drying into stiffness. When you drape it over your shoulders, the wool settles with a real weight, heavier than a towel, heavier than steam, and more shaping. It presses across your upper back and down over your arms, and at once your posture alters beneath it. Your shoulders drop a little farther, then seem to widen under the downward pull. The nape of your neck, damp from heat, meets the brushed inner nap of the collar. The fibers are warm, but not hot, and they catch on the skin in a way that feels almost medicinal. Along your upper arms, the wool first grazes, then holds. Across your shoulder blades, it gathers the heat leaving you and gives it back more slowly. The change is immediate. Sauna heat still rising from the skin, wool heat settling over it. The two meeting in a dense, quiet layer that belongs to neither room entirely. You do not belt it. There is no need. You simply gather the front closed with one hand and stand near the doorway, where the room keeps part of the sauna's heat without all of it. Firelight from the adjoining bench space lays a dim amber strip across the old pine floorboards. The seam of brightness does not reach far. It catches the edge of the copper bucket, left where it was after the last filling, and the pail answers with a low, dull gleam rather than any bright shine. A dry trail marks where a few droplets had once run down its side and disappeared in the warmth under the wool. You want to stay here a moment. The heat no longer surrounds you. It is held against you. Your chest loosens under the robe. The place between your shoulder blades, which can keep a memory of the week longer than the rest of you, eases by degrees beneath that broad, downward pressure. Even your jaw, that old collector of small, unfinished things, has unclasped sometime in the last few rounds. You find your tongue resting low and untroubled in your mouth. It is a plain bodily fact, and enough. For a little while you stay there, halfway between rooms. The robe on your shoulders, the floor under your feet, the warm latch at your back, the faint draft near the lower edge of the outer door. These are sufficient details to fill your attention. You can feel heat still leaving your skin into the wool, then returning from it, altered, less bright, more even. You can feel cooler air gathering around your calves where the hem opens. Your fingers, folded at the robe's front, cool first at the knuckles, and then warm again from their own contact and from the wool brushing the backs of them. it is such a small cycle that it might once have gone unnoticed. Tonight, it is enough to follow. From beyond the outer door, there comes no sound distinct enough to name. Only the changed pressure of winter on the other side of wood. Snow has thickened over the evening. You know this without seeing it, by the way the light outside has grown more diffuse, by the muffled quality that enters whenever the door opens, by how North Lamp has dimmed each time you stepped out and looked toward the jetty. The lake below remains black under it all. Not visible from where you stand now, but present in the mind the way a familiar room remains present after the lamp is turned low. You lift one hand from the robe and touch the doorframe. The wood there is smoother from years of passing palms, less resinous than the bench, more worn at the grain. The difference under your fingertips is immediate. Cedar in the sauna keeps more of its scent when heated. This trim by the threshold has been polished instead by use, by damp hands and dry ones, by people pausing exactly where you pause now. It is enough to know that the wood has this texture and that your hand recognizes it. After another moment, you turn back toward the sauna. The return feels easy now. You let the robe slide from your shoulders and hang it once more on the hook. The wool leaves behind a broad after-warmth across your upper arms and back. And for a moment, your skin misses the weight before the room answers. You re-enter the cedar heat with that brief coolness still on you. And the contrast makes the first touch of sauna air seem fuller than before. Not stronger, just more complete. The quiet shelf receives your weight without surprise. The towel has kept enough warmth that there is no flinch of adjustment when you sit. Your feet draw up. One heel rests against the bench, the other against the opposite calf. The felt hat has shifted slightly from standing and moving. You settle it lower over your ears with 2 fingers. Then let your hand fall again. The cedar at your back is almost the same temperature as your skin now, so that after a few moments, the boundary between them becomes harder to notice. You do not reach for the ladle yet. There is pleasure in the room before steam, in the evenness that follows a previous round. The air is dry enough to let your skin speak clearly. Dampness left by the robe at your neck begins to disappear. Your forearms, which had cooled in the doorway, start to gather heat from the room and from your own sides where they rest. The tops of your feet warm more slowly than your knees. Your hands, laid palm down on the towel, take longest of all. You can feel the return happen in stages. Fingertips first, then the centers of the palms, then the small bones at the wrists. The stove ticks again, then is still. At some point, you lean forward and take Eero's birch ladle from beside the bucket. The handle is darkened smooth where years of use have polished it. And even now, after all the heat and damp of the room, birch keeps a comfortable feel in the hand. Not slick, not cold. The bucket water remains mineral bright and clear. When you dip the ladle, the copper gives back a low note, and the water shifts against the sides with a sound that belongs exactly to this room and no other. You lift the ladle without haste. The stones are already hot enough to answer. You know it from the steadiness of the room, from the way heat continues to rise from them, even in stillness. Olivine diabase stores its warmth densely. The effect is familiar by now. Not something to inspect, but something to trust. The first pour touches the upper stones with a quick, bright hiss. Then comes the fuller sound beneath it. Water finding lower gaps, turning at once to steam. The wave rises and rolls outward, not sharply, but with breadth. It reaches your shins, your hands, your chest, and finally your face, where it passes over the skin like a warmer layer of air laid carefully on top of the first. You set the ladle back. For a few moments, the steam is all movement and contact. Then it becomes atmosphere again. Moisture beads briefly along your upper lip and at the hollow of your throat. The cedar scent deepens. The iron note from the stove recedes behind the steam's mineral fullness. Your shoulders, already lowered, seem to settle by another fraction. You still feel the robe's weight on your shoulders. You can still feel where it pressed. A broad, downward reassurance that has not yet left the muscles beneath. When the heat thickens around you, you do not measure it against anything. You simply let it arrive. There is more room under the sternum now. More room where the next breath enters. Even the belly, which can tighten without permission on other nights, has gone unguarded. You notice this not as an achievement, but as a change in shape. As if the robe had briefly taught the body another arrangement, and the steam is now confirming it. After some time, you stand once more. This time, the movement is slower still, as if the room has taught your limbs a different speed. The floorboards meet your feet with their stored warmth nearest the bench, and a cooler grain farther from it. You open the door to the pause space and step through. The robe comes from the hook again, and again it settles over your shoulders with that dense, brushed comfort. A little more heat has entered it since the last time. The collar touches your neck like a warmed hand. The wool takes the fresh steam from your skin and holds it close. Your upper back yields to it at once. Your arms, half cooled from leaving the bench, disappear into warmth that does not rush them. It simply stays. You remain by the door, not yet going out. The outer latch is there when you want it. Beyond it, the deck will have taken another sift of snow. The railing will be whitening over again. North lamp will still be somewhere through the weather. Dimmer, perhaps, its amber reflection nearly erased from the lake. Behind you, the sauna waits in its steady cedar heat, stones ready to answer again. But none of that needs to happen immediately. The round has grown spacious enough to include this pause fully, and the pause has grown persuasive. Wool over skin, cedar in the air, the last steam still on your face, your feet cooling by degrees on the old boards, while the rest of you stays gathered and warm. One hand holds the robe closed. The other rests lightly near the latch. You could go back in now, while the skin still carries the robe's slow warmth and the next steam would meet it. You could stay exactly here, where heat is no longer a force, but a weight. Where winter waits on one side of the door and Cedar on the other, and you don't want to break the pause. The choice hangs there, almost tender in its pull, and you do not make it yet. Chapter 10. Black water, white, quiet. The rounds begin to blur together. With the robe still over your shoulders, you stand for a moment near the door and feel how little is needed before stepping out again. The wool has taken on the room's warmth without becoming dry or light. It keeps its weight, a steady pull across the tops of your shoulders and down along your arms. Beneath it, your skin still carries the heat of the bench. Your feet have cooled on the old boards just enough to notice the grain under the soles. You set the robe back on the hook, where it falls into its familiar shape. The felt hat stays on. One hand finds the latch. The metal is cooler than the wood around it, though not enough to startle. By now, even these small changes in temperature arrive already expected, already placed in order with the rest. The door opens on its hinges with that same measured give, and the air outside meets your face at once. Clean, bright, almost tasteable. Behind you, amber light spreads a short way over the deck boards and catches the railing where new snow has built in a narrow white line. Beyond that, the night has simplified. You step out barefoot. The boards are dusted again. Fresh powder folds under your weight and lets the old pine texture come through in ridges and seams. Cold reaches first through the balls of your feet, then the arches, then the heels, each place waking in turn. You do not hurry across it. The deck is narrow enough that the railing and the dark drop toward the lake are both near. But the space feels plain and sufficient. Just wood beneath you, air around you, water below. The door eases nearly shut at your back, not fully latched. A fine band of fire-colored light remains at the frame. It touches one edge of the threshold and leaves the rest to snowlight. You stand for the first breath. Cold enters high in the nose and settles clear at the back of the throat. Your chest widens under it without effort. The air is so dry and clean that it seems to pass through you in a single, smooth line. Heat from the sauna still lives in your skin, especially at the neck, at the upper chest, along the forearms, where steam had beaded and dried. The contrast is still clear, but easier to take. The lake below is black, but not empty black. It has depth to it, a density that catches what little light reaches down. Snow passes before it in white strokes, each one visible for an instant, and then gone, farther out, where the jetty would be by day. North Lamp is only a dim amber point. Its reflection, once a clear line on the water, has nearly disappeared. What remains is only a blurred stain of color, broken by snowfall and distance, until it is hard to tell where the lamp ends and the lake begins. You take the second breath. The cold has moved lower now, from skin into muscle, into the fronts of the shins and the small bones of the ankles. At the same time, warmth rises from within, not as a rush, but as a stored thing returning to the surface. Your shoulders drop another fraction. The jaw unfastens where it had held without your noticing. Snow gathers on the top rail in a powdery ridge, and a few grains land against the back of your hand before melting to pinprick wetness. Somewhere below the deck, near the shore where dark water meets the ice-bound edge, there is a faint hush. Not a splash, not a break, only a low movement under the stillness, as if a narrow strip of water remains free and shifts against wood or stone. You hear it because almost nothing else is there to hear. Even the pines have withdrawn into their own dark shapes, their branches loaded and made broader by snow. You take the third breath. By the end of it, the body has already begun to answer. The soles of your feet feel both colder and more distinct. The skin at your wrists, where your pulse lies close, notices the air first. The nape of the neck, under the rim of the hat, cools in a single clear patch. Your breathing has lengthened without any instruction from you. Then you bend and scoop up fresh snow. It is lighter than it looked on the rail, loose and dry at the top, with a little denser cold underneath, where earlier flakes have settled together. You brush it over one wrist, then the other. The contact is bright, almost granular, then instantly wet. Melt runs in narrow threads toward the palms. You gather another small handful and pass it over each ankle, circling the bones and the tendons above the heels. Cold flares there and then evens out. Last, you touch snow to the back of the neck. It slips under the edge of the hat and dissolves at once. A brief line of winter moving down between the shoulders. You straighten again and remain where you are. By now, the motions are automatic. There is room around it now. Room to notice the way the deck boards darken where flakes melt against warmer skin. Room to notice your own breath leaving faintly visible for an instant before the snowfall takes it from sight. Room to look outward without searching for anything. Lake Varma lies below, like a broad piece of iron left in darkness. Not flat exactly, not featureless, but reduced to tone and depth. Along the near edge, where shore and water meet, the blackness softens into a rougher band. That is where the faint hush comes from now and then. So slight you could miss it if your thoughts were busier. Tonight, they are not. The sound reaches you and passes. The amber line from the doorway has shortened as the door settles another fraction on its hinges. It still marks your place in the night. Warmth behind, snow above, black water below. You feel it in the skin of the face, in the cooled hands, in the heat banked low in your chest and belly from the last round inside. A little more snow has gathered on the railing while you stand there. You can see where earlier powder has already been brushed away by your hand, and where the new flakes have begun to fill it back in. They land without sound. A few cling to the wool edge of the hat. One catches briefly on your eyelashes and vanishes. You rest your fingertips on the top rail. The wood beneath the snow is colder than the air had seemed, and smoother. Your fingers leave shallow tracks in the powder. Through the railing slats, the dark of the lake appears in narrow, vertical bands. The height of the deck above the shore is modest, and yet from here, the water seems farther down than it does by day. Not distant, only simplified, with the snowfall thickened and the lamp nearly gone from the surface. There are fewer points to measure by. The scene is simpler in the snow. Earlier in the night, it had felt open in the old way large winter water can feel open. With breadth, you notice all at once. Now, the same breadth lies under the snow and darkness as something steadier. It does not spread outward so much as settle under the deck, under the jetty, under the trees. Behind you, from within the cabin, there comes the faintest sound of the stove answering itself as metal cools and shifts. A tiny settling tick, muted by the door. It is enough to place the room in your mind without your seeing it. The bench, the bucket, the warm cedar, the stored heat in the stones. You do not turn back yet. It is enough to know the arrangement remains as it was. Your feet have reached that narrow point where cold becomes almost abstract for a moment. No longer many separate sensations, but one clear field from toes to heels. Then, gradually, detail returns. The left foot feels the raised line of a board seam. The right heel has melted a round patch through the powder. The ankles, brushed with snow, carry a lingering chill that sharpens the warmth waiting for them on the other side of the threshold. Another breath comes and goes. You do not count this one. The ritual has already been completed. You stay a little longer. Your shoulders are no longer lifted against the air. The hands hang more loosely. Even the face has changed. The skin across the cheeks, first touched by cold, has adjusted. And now the sensation is finer, less like impact and more like clarity. Northlamp dims and brightens by degrees as the snowfall passes before it. Sometimes it is only a smear of amber suspended among white streaks. Sometimes the point itself comes through. Its reflection on the lake is almost fully erased now. Once in a while, you catch a tremor of color below it, then lose it again. You remember how clear it had been earlier, a longer mark on the water. And the difference does not ask for meaning. It is simply what the snow has done. At the edge of the deck, one small drift has begun to form where the boards meet the outer post. It has a crisp lip on the windward side and a softer slope behind. By morning, it will be larger. Tonight, it is only enough to notice that the snow is still adding itself to things, grain by grain, while you stand here. The cold at the back of your neck has turned from bright to steady. Melt water from the snow on your wrists has already dried in the air. At the ankles, the last dampness remains under the bones, trapped for a moment before it too disappears. These small changes are enough to mark time. You do not need more than that. When you finally move, it is only a shift of weight at first. One foot easing, then the other. Toes pressing into the powder before lifting. The boards answer with the faintest give. Your hand leaves the railing. Snow remains where your fingertips did not touch it. You turn toward the door. The amber seam widens as you pull it open again, and warmth reaches out low and immediate. First to the shins, then the hands, then the face. The smell of cedar and iron comes with it, along with the dry interior air that has been shaped by stone and fire. Behind that, farther in, the older trace of alder under birch is still present, woven into the heated wood. For one moment, you stand at the threshold with one foot in snow and one on the dark, dry board inside. Cold and warmth meet along the arches and ankles and travel upward in opposite directions. Then you step through, carrying the cold back in with you. The door draws in behind you, and the line of night narrows to the frame, then lessens. Warmth begins at once to return to your feet, not all at once. First the sting, then the tingling, then the deeper heat moving back into the soles. You pause there long enough to feel the change begin. Beyond the inner door, the bench and the stones remain in their places, and the next return is already forming in the same unhurried order. Chapter 11. The last full round. Beyond the inner door, the bench and the stones remain in their places, and you go back in. You ease the latch and step back through, and the warmth feels continuous now. The cold from the deck still traces your ankles and the backs of your wrists where the snow touched them. Yet even that begins to blur as soon as the cedar air closes around you again. The felt hat keeps the top of your head in its own dry climate. Your breath, which sharpened outside, rounds at once. Behind you, the door settles into its frame with a wooden note you have heard enough times tonight that it no longer stands apart from the rest of the room. The floorboards under your feet are warmer than they were before. Not hot, only stored with enough heat that the soles can unclench. A few grains of tracked snow darken the wood near the threshold, already shrinking into damp marks. You notice them, and then let them be. The robe remains on the juniper hook, thick and slightly heavier where it has taken in warmth from the room. You do not need it yet. The air itself is enough. A faint seam of firelight from the pause space lies under the sauna door. Beyond it, the bench by the stove remains where you left it. And farther still, the deck boards are taking another dusting of snow. Your hand finds the sauna latch. The metal is warm from the room. No shock in it at all. And when you open the door, the deeper heat reaches out in a broad, familiar front. Inside, The stove sits in its usual squat, dark shape, iron sides breathing their stored warmth into the cedar room. The stones above it are dim and dry at the surface, though heat still rises from them with a mineral steadiness that you feel first across your face and then at the chest. The bucket stands beside the bench, matte copper dulled by steam and touch. Only a little water remains, enough for one more round. You step up to the quiet shelf and sit with the practiced care the night has taught back into your limbs. The cedar receives your weight with a warmth already set into the grain. Towel beneath you, bench beneath that. Your thighs ease down. Your shoulders lower without being asked. The muscles along the small of your back, which earlier kept a little brace even while you rested, now let go more completely against the heated wood behind them. For a while, you do nothing more than sit. The air is dry at first, and that dryness has its own kindness. It lets the skin finish adjusting. It lets the last outdoor brightness pass from the face and hands. The iron breath from the stove has a faint alder memory under it. The older smoke note that has sunk into boards and door frame over years of heating this way. Tervalepa first, then birch, then stone, then steam. You do not think it through in words. You know it the way your hands know the shape of the ladle handle before they touch it. Somewhere low in the stove, the fire shifts against itself. Not much. A small, inward settling. Then stillness again. You rest your palms on your thighs and feel the heat gather there. Your fingers, cooled outside, have nearly come back already. The knuckles lose their stiffness. The wrists, where the snow was brushed over skin, begin to carry that curious in-between sensation that belongs only to this part of the round. Not cold, not warm, but changing. Breath enters, breath leaves. Each exhale takes a little more time than the one before it. Bench, bucket, stones, door, your own breathing. The towel gives one dry rustle when you shift your weight an inch farther back. Then even that is done. When you reach for the ladle, your arm moves without hurry. Arrow's birch ladle is dark at the handle from years of use, the wood smoothed by damp palms and repeated drying. Birch stays kind in the hand in this heat. That old practical knowledge is in the shape of it. The bowl dips into the copper bucket with a low note, and the water inside answers with a brief, bright sound. Mineral cold, even now. The handle remains comfortable against your fingers, neither slick nor rough, only worn to the right degree. You lift one ladleful and pause. It is not a ceremonial pause, only the natural measure that has come into you after enough rounds. There is no need to test either one. The water falls in a clear arc over the top stones. At contact, the sound is immediate and full. A rounded hiss, then a deeper breath of steam rising through the stack. The olivine diabase takes the water densely, without the sharp spit of lesser stone. Steam opens from them in one broad release and begins to climb. A beat later, the iron sides of the stove answer with a sequence of tiny, settling ticks, each one distinct, each one small enough that you could miss it if the room were not already this reduced. Tick, then another, then two close together. You set the ladle back into the bucket and lean again into stillness while the lowly reaches you. It arrives first at the shoulders and upper chest, where the dry heat had left more space. Then across the face, softening the skin around the eyes. Then lower, over the ribs and belly, where breath begins to move more freely under it. The wave is fuller than the first rounds of the night, though not stronger in any demanding way. By now, your body no longer resists it. Heat no longer has to persuade. It only arrives, and you receive it. The felt hat keeps the crown of your head dry, while steam passes around your temples and ears. A bead of moisture forms near your hairline and slips down toward the jaw. Another gathers at the base of your throat. Sweat comes more readily now, less as effort than as completion. Along your spine, warmth spreads in a long vertical line, each small muscle beside it loosening in turn. Your knees part a fraction. Your feet settle more heavily on the bench rung below. The steam thickens, then evens out. You can feel where it gathers most steadily, at shoulder height on the quiet shelf. One of those plain truths of the room that no longer needs noticing every time. The cedar behind your back gives off its honey scent more strongly under the added moisture. Iron, cedar, mineral water. The three notes meet and remain balanced. You close your eyes for a few breaths, not to disappear from the room, but to feel it more exactly. The hiss from the stones fades into a fine, almost silky sound. Then that too thins. What remains is the after presence of steam on skin, the pressure of heat around the knees and chest, and the stove's occasional answer as its metal adjusts inward by degrees. Another tick. A longer pause. Then one last faint click from somewhere lower in the casing. You could stay with dry heat now and be content. Still, after a time, your hand goes again to the ladle. The bucket has less water than before, and the sound it makes when the bowl enters is slightly shallower. You draw up a smaller measure this time, enough to refresh the air, not remake it. The motion has become so familiar that it barely separates itself from breathing. The second pour lands nearer the center of the stones. A quicker hiss this time, shorter and finer. Steam rises in a lower wave and folds through the room. The iron answers once, then again. A tiny chain of settling ticks running across one side of the stove. You hear in them the way hot metal gives and retakes its shape. Not dramatically, only honestly. The room has spoken this way all night. Now each sound arrives complete, with no need to name it after hearing. Your chest expands more fully under this new steam. The breath in is broad, but unforced. The breath out goes a long way. It leaves through the mouth once, then through the nose, warm and slow. The jaw hangs loose enough that your molars no longer meet. Across the forehead, where thought often gathers itself into a line, the skin has gone smooth. The back of your neck still remembers snow for a moment longer, and then even that memory changes into warmth. You know where you are in the round. You know the bucket is nearly spent, and the stones have given what they were meant to give. You know there will be another transition after this, perhaps only to the doorway, perhaps to the robe, perhaps nowhere more than a shift of weight and a longer rest. But these are not plans. They are simply the shapes the next minutes might take. A droplet falls from your forearm to the bench. Another traces the inside of your wrist and cools for an instant before disappearing into the room's heat. The towel under your hands has dampened at the edges. When you draw your fingertips over it, the weave catches lightly against the pads of your fingers. Such small contact is enough to keep you here, exactly here. The stove door, somewhere below the stones, gives a muted metal note as an ember settles behind it. Not a clank, more like a low answer from within the firebox, followed by a brief red brightening at the seam if you were to look down. You do not need to look. The sound tells you enough. The birch has burned down to a steadier bed. The older alder note remains in the air beneath it, faint and dry. You open your eyes. The room is amber and cedar dark in the same way it has been all night. But your seeing has changed. Edges matter less. You do not count boards or measure distance from bench to stove. The bucket is there. The ladle rests inside it, with the handle angled toward you. The stones are darkening again at the surface as the last moisture leaves them. A little steam still lifts, but only in traces. The stove keeps giving back what it has stored. Your hands move once more, though only to set the ladle handle straighter against the bucket rim. Birch against copper. A small click. Then your palms return to your thighs. You set the handle where it will be easy to find. Habit can be soothing in this plain way. Not a rule, just a settled order among familiar things. Heat presses more deeply into the hips now, where the bench has had longest contact. The backs of your thighs feel heavy and released. Around the ribs, breath keeps its slow breath. Your shoulders no longer need to be reminded downward. They have stayed there. Even your feet, which met the snowboards not long ago, have lost the last trace of bracing and rest against the rung with full weight. The final steam of the round fades gradually. No moment announces its passing. The room simply changes texture again, from moist warmth to the drier, cedar-scented heat beneath it. The stones continue to radiate. The iron sides give one last pair of tiny, settling ticks, so faint they almost merge with the sound of your own breathing. You sit through that change without moving. Beyond the door, the pause space remains dim with firelight. Beyond that, the deck gathers another skim of snow above the black water. North Lamp is still somewhere in the weather, reduced to a faint amber blur when the snowfall thins enough to let it through. Here, on the quiet shelf, you remain where you are. The air touches your skin. The bench supports you. The stove keeps its heat. And after the last hiss has gone, and the last tick has answered it, you remain where you are, breathing in the cedar dark room, while the stones go on giving back their stored warmth by degrees. Chapter 12. After Steam. You stay on the bench a little longer after the last steam has thinned. The heat has settled into the wood beneath you, the towel under your thighs, and the skin along your shoulders and chest. Across from you, the stove has gone almost still, not silent quite. Its iron sides answer themselves once in a while with a small inward tick as the stones continue to release what they have taken in. You do not reach for more water. The bucket beside the bench carries only a thin shine at the bottom now. Copper catches the dim amber light and gives it back without brightness. Arrow's birch ladle lies across the rim where you left it, the handle darkened by years of heat and damp and hands. Your next movement is small enough that it barely disturbs the room. One hand to the bench, feet to the floorboards. The soles of your feet meet wood, dried and warmed after the last tracked-in snow. You stand with the care that comes naturally at this hour, without hurry. At the door, the latch is warm under your fingers. When you open it, the air in the pause space feels lighter against your face, less full of steam, touched by fire and timber, and the faint old smoke note that has lived in these boards for years. Behind you, the sauna keeps its cedar heat. Before you, the adjoining room glows lower than it did earlier. Firelight still lies along the floorboards in a long amber strip. And somewhere behind the stove door, embers settle with a muted red steadiness. You step through and ease the door nearly shut again. The wool robe hangs where it has hung all evening, on the juniper hook by the outer door. When you lift it free, the fabric falls heavily over your forearms, dense and familiar, warmer at the collar where the air has gathered around it. You draw it over your shoulders, and the robe feels immediately comfortable. The belt brushes your wrists before you gather it and tie it loosely. Here, the warmth is slower and more local. It settles where the fabric presses. Your hands disappear into the sleeves for a moment, and when you draw them back out, your fingers are already beginning to curl toward rest. You stand by the door without opening it yet. The outer latch is cooler than the inner one. You press it down and open the door a hand's breadth first, then wider. Snowlight enters before the cold does, whitening the threshold and the nearest boards. Then the air reaches you, clean and dry, slipping first into the opening at the throat of the robe, then around your cheeks and hands. you step onto the deck. Fresh powder has gathered again over your earlier crossings. The boards receive your weight with the same faint give they have given all night. Snow catches at your bare feet and melts where your soles are still warm. At the railing, a narrow line of white has built up feather by feather. Beyond it, Lake Varma is a dark plain with almost no detail. Only a slight difference in blackness where open water lies farther out from the shore. You pause for 3 breaths. The first breath carries cold into the nose and mouth, crisp enough to feel along the back of the throat. The second reaches lower, and your chest widens beneath the robe before easing down again. By the third, the shock has passed. Cheeks cool first, toes next, the backs of your hands. A thread of air at the ankles where the robe opens. You bend and gather a little fresh snow from the railing. It is lighter than earlier, finer. You brush it over one wrist and then the other, then over one ankle, then the other, the powder catching for an instant against damp warmth before falling away in grains. Last, your hand reaches back beneath the robe's collar, and you press a little snow to the back of your neck. For 1 second, the skin tightens. Then the cold begins to spread and thin. When you straighten, a few crystals remain in the wool at your shoulder before disappearing. North Lamp is still there, though the snowfall has reduced it to a faint amber bead near the jetty. Its reflection on the lake is hardly a reflection now, just a blurred vertical stain that comes and goes behind the moving white. Snow continues to descend through the pine-dark margin around the cabin. The railing gathers more. The deck boards gather more. The shoulders of your robe begin to gather a dusting that melts down into the wool and leaves it darker in tiny specks. After a while, you turn back toward the amber seam of the open door. You step in without brushing all the snow from your feet. A few grains come with you over the threshold and darken the floorboards before they vanish. The door closes to a narrow line, and then to almost none at all, leaving the room in its dim, firelit hush. Inside again, the robe grows heavier for a minute, where snow touched it, then lighter as the damp begins to lift. You do not go straight back into the sauna. Instead, you remain in the pause space, one hand resting on the wood beside the door, feeling the old pine under your palm. The boards are smoother in some places than others, worn by years of bare feet and damp hems and hands finding their way in low light. Under the robe, your skin is in the middle of changing over. Cold still marks the wrists and the back of the neck. Heat returns first to the fingers, then the forearms, then to the tops of the feet. From the sauna room, the last of the heat continues to drift through the not quite closed door. It reaches you in intervals, so mild they are almost impossible to separate from the room's own warmth. Cedar, dry and honeyed. A trace of mineral heat from the stones. Once, from behind the door, comes one final settling tick. After that, nothing distinct for several breaths. Only the low, red life of embers somewhere beyond sight. You move to the bench and sit. The robe folds under you and thickens the seat. Your back finds the wall. Your shoulders lower another fraction, enough that the wool collar slides and exposes a narrow strip of cooling skin at the base of the throat. You could adjust it, but you do not. The balance is right as it is. Warm fabric, cooler air at the face, feet on old boards, hands resting one inside the other. A little meltwater from your hairline has dried under the felt hat. The hat itself has become almost weightless in your awareness. Just a mild pressure around the head. In the same way, the robe belt at your waist, the bench under your hips, the floor under your feet, the dim square of the outer door, the nearly hidden line of the sauna latch beside it. It all fades into the background. You look once toward the window side of the room, where a faint whitening tells you snow still passes outside. North Lamp remains a muted amber point beyond the glass and weather. Your breathing is quiet now, not shallower, just less effortful. The chest rises under the robe and falls again. The jaw stays loose. The tongue rests away from the roof of the mouth. Even the small muscles around the eyes have eased, so that your gaze softens without closing. You sit that way for a while, not measuring the time, while the cabin gives off what it has gathered all evening by degrees. So you remain. The robe warms where it covers you. In the sauna, the stones go on releasing what they can, slower now, into cedar dark air. Beyond the window, the amber bead holds and blurs